"Help me, I'm suffocating!" she cried from somewhere deep within the abandoned mine shaft, her voice echoing off stone walls like a dying prayer. But when Navajo warrior Atsa Goldtooth removed the heavy canvas sack from her trembling form, his blood ran cold, and everything he thought he knew about the white settlers' war on his people took a horrifying new turn that would test not only his warrior's heart, but his very soul in ways he never imagined possible. What Atsa discovered that October morning in 1876 would ignite a chain of events that would see him hunted across 3 territories, force him to question everything his grandfather had taught him about honor and mercy, and ultimately lead him to make a choice between the ancient ways of his people and a love that could either save 2 worlds or destroy them both. This is the story of how a single act of compassion in the high desert of New Mexico became the spark that would either unite 2 peoples or see them consumed in the flames of a hatred that had been burning since the first white man set foot on sacred ground. The sun had barely crested the red sandstone mesas when Atsa Goldtooth began his morning patrol of the sacred hunting grounds his grandfather had entrusted to his protection. The ancient Winchester rifle his father had taken from a dead cavalry soldier slung across his broad shoulders as he moved through the pinon pines with the silence of a hunting cat. At 28, Atsa was considered one of the finest warriors among the Diné people. His name whispered with respect around the fires of 5 different clans scattered across the high desert country between Canyon de Chelly and the Rio Grande. A man who could track a deer through solid rock and read the intentions of white soldiers 3 days before they crossed into sacred territory. His face bore the weathered bronze of countless desert winds, high cheekbones and deep-set dark eyes that missed nothing, while his long black hair was braided with strips of leather and adorned with eagle feathers earned through deeds of courage that had already passed into legend among his people. The buckskin shirt he wore had been crafted by his grandmother's hands before the long walk, decorated with intricate beadwork that told the story of his clan's migrations across the sacred mountains, while his leggings bore the scars of battles fought against both Apache raiders and cavalry patrols that had strayed too far from their designated routes. But today, something felt different about the desert morning, a tension in the air that made the hair on his arms stand straight and caused his horse, a painted Mustang named Thunder Walker, to snort and paw nervously at the red earth beneath his hooves. Atsa had learned long ago to trust both his instincts and his horse's supernatural ability to sense danger before it revealed itself, a skill that had kept him alive through the brutal years following the failed attempt to relocate his people to the barren reservation at Bosque Redondo. The morning air carried scents that didn't belong in this sacred place, the acrid smell of unwashed white men, gunpowder that had been recently fired, and something else, something that made his warrior's heart clench with a familiar dread he hadn't felt since the day he'd found his youngest sister's body after a cavalry raid. He guided Thunderwalker toward a series of abandoned silver mine shafts that dotted the eastern slope of Mesa Encantada, old excavations that had been carved into the mountain by Mexican prospectors decades ago and then abandoned when the silver veins played out and Apache war parties made mining too dangerous for profit. The mines had become a place of bad medicine, according to the elders, wounded earth that cried out in pain whenever the wind blew through the empty tunnels. But they were also perfect hiding places for anyone who wanted to avoid the cavalry patrols that had been increasing in frequency since the recent troubles at Fort Defiance. As he approached the largest mine entrance, a gaping wound in the red rock that descended into darkness deeper than a man could see, Atsa noticed fresh horse tracks in the sand, at least 4 different animals, all shod in the manner of white men's mounts. The tracks were less than a day old, made sometime during the previous evening when the desert air would have been cool enough for hard travel, and they led directly into the mine shaft before disappearing on the stone floor of the tunnel. Atsa dismounted and ground-tied Thunderwalker to a stunted juniper tree, checking his rifle's action and ensuring the knife at his belt moved freely in its sheath before beginning his careful descent into the bowels of the wounded mountain. The mineshaft descended at a steep angle for perhaps 50 feet, before leveling off into a horizontal tunnel that branched in 3 directions. The walls bearing the pick marks and drill holes of men who had torn silver from the earth with no thought for the spirits that dwelled in the stone. Atsa moved through the darkness with the patience of a hunter, allowing his eyes to adjust to the gloom, while his ears strained to catch any sound that might indicate the presence of enemies or prey. The tunnel system was more extensive than he had remembered from his previous explorations, branching and rebranching into a maze of passages that could easily hide a small army or serve as a death trap for anyone foolish enough to enter without knowing the way out. He had penetrated perhaps 200 feet into the mountain when he heard it, a sound so faint and desperate that for a moment he thought it might be the wind moaning through the empty passages. "Help me! I'm suffocating." The voice was definitely human, definitely female, and definitely coming from somewhere deeper in the mine system, echoing off the stone walls in a way that made it impossible to determine the exact direction. Atsa froze, every muscle in his body tensed for action, his mind racing through the possibilities of what he might be walking into. Whether this was a trap set by cavalry soldiers or bounty hunters who had learned to use captive women as bait. The voice came again, weaker now but more desperate. "Please, someone, anyone, I can't breathe in here." Against every instinct screaming at him to retreat and bring help. Against every lesson his grandfather had taught him about the treacherous nature of white settlers and their endless capacity for deception. Atsa found himself moving deeper into the mine, drawn by something in that voice that spoke to the warrior's code, burned into his very soul. He followed the sound through a series of increasingly narrow passages, his rifle ready, his breathing controlled, until he came to a chamber where 4 tunnels converged, and the voice seemed to be coming from all directions at once. "Help me, please! I'm dying in here!" The voice was definitely coming from the passage to his left, a tunnel that sloped downward into what appeared to be a natural cave system beyond the worked mine shafts. Atsa descended the slope carefully, testing each step before committing his weight, knowing that a single misstep could send him tumbling into unknown depths or alert anyone hiding in the darkness to his presence. The passage opened into a large natural cavern, and there, in a shaft of pale light filtering down through a crack in the ceiling, he saw what had been calling for help. At first, Atsa thought it was simply a pile of canvas and rope left behind by the miners, but as he approached, the bundle moved, jerked with the unmistakable motion of something alive and desperate trapped within. The voice came again, muffled now, but clearly from within the canvas sack. "Please, I know someone's there. I can hear footsteps. Please don't leave me to die like this." Atsa knelt beside the bundle, his hands working at the ropes that bound it shut, thick hemp cords tied with the kind of knots that spoke of military training or long experience with securing prisoners for transport. As the ropes fell away and he pulled back the heavy canvas, what he found inside made his blood run cold, and his warrior's heart fill with a rage so pure and terrible that for a moment he could not trust himself to speak or move. Inside the sack was a young white woman, perhaps 23 or 24 years old, with golden hair that had been matted with sweat and dirt, her wrists bound with thin cord that had cut into her skin, leaving bloody welts that spoke of long hours of struggle. Her dress, once fine blue silk that marked her as a woman of means, was torn and stained, her face bearing bruises that could only have come from deliberate violence, while her eyes, when they opened and focused on his face, held a mixture of terror and desperate hope that cut through his heart like a cavalry saber. But it was not her condition that froze his blood. Terrible as that was, it was what he saw tattooed onto her left shoulder, visible through a tear in her dress fabric, a mark that made him understand exactly who had done this to her and why. The tattoo was a small eagle with spread wings, the mark of the Pinkerton Detective Agency, the same symbol he had seen on wanted posters bearing his own face. The mark of the organization that had been hunting him and his fellow warriors for the past 2 years. This woman was not some innocent traveler who had fallen victim to random violence. She was a Pinkerton agent, one of the hunters sent to track down and capture or kill the Apache and Navajo leaders who had refused to submit to reservation life. For a moment, every instinct told him to leave her there, to let the desert take its revenge on one of those who had brought so much suffering to his people. But as he looked into her eyes and saw not the cold calculation of a professional hunter, but genuine human terror and gratitude, something deeper than vengeance stirred in his chest. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I thought I was going to die in that sack. I've been trapped here for 2 days without water, please. I know you have every reason to hate what I represent, but please don't leave me here." Atsa studied her face, searching for deception, for the kind of calculating manipulation he had learned to expect from white agents. But all he saw was exhaustion, genuine fear, and something else. Something that looked almost like shame. "You are Pinkerton," he said finally, his English careful but clear, learned during the years when his people had been forced to interact with government officials and military commanders. She nodded slowly, tears beginning to track down her dirt-stained cheeks. "My name is Lillian Winters, but everyone calls me Lily. I was sent here to gather information about Apache movements near the border. But something went wrong, terribly wrong." Atsa began cutting the cords that bound her wrists, noting that whoever had tied them had intended them to cut off circulation, a slow torture that would have eventually cost her hands, if not her life. "Who did this to you?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "My own people," Lily whispered, confirming his suspicions. "My partner, Agent Daniel Morrison, and 2 men from the Territorial Marshal's office. They said I had learned too much, that I was asking too many questions about things that weren't my concern." As feeling began to return to her hands, Lily winced and flexed her fingers, her voice growing stronger as she continued. "I found out about the silver mines, about what they're really doing up here. It's not about catching Apache or Navajo warriors. It's about something much worse, something that involves children." Atsa's jaw clenched, his mind immediately jumping to the reports that had been filtering through the tribal networks. Stories of children disappearing from reservation schools, of young people vanishing during trips to trading posts and never being seen again. "What did you learn?" he asked, helping her to sit up against the cavern wall, noting that despite her ordeal, there was intelligence and strength in her eyes that had not been broken by whatever she had endured. Lily looked at him directly, her blue eyes meeting his dark ones without flinching. "They're taking native children, dozens of them, selling them to mining companies and cattle ranches as forced labor. The silver mines are just the cover story. The real money is in human trafficking." The words hit Atsa like a physical blow, confirming his worst fears about the fate of the missing children. The young people who had simply vanished without trace over the past several months. Morrison and his men. "They found out I was planning to report what I'd discovered to the territorial governor. So they decided to eliminate me, make it look like I was killed by Apache raiders. Just another casualty of the ongoing conflicts." Atsa stood slowly, his mind racing through the implications of what she had told him, understanding now that this woman represented both a tremendous opportunity and a deadly threat to everything he held sacred. "Why should I believe you?" he asked, though something in his gut already told him she was speaking the truth. "How do I know this is not another trap, another attempt to capture me or learn the location of my people?" Lily struggled to her feet, swaying slightly from dehydration and exhaustion. "Because if I wanted to trap you, Atsa Goldtooth, I would have chosen a method that didn't involve nearly dying of thirst in a canvas sack. And because I can prove everything I've told you." The fact that she knew his name sent a chill down his spine, but before he could react, she reached into her torn dress and produced a small leather portfolio, the kind carried by government agents and military officers. "Everything is in here," she said, holding out the portfolio with shaking hands. Names, locations, financial records, even photographs of some of the children they've taken. I spent 3 months gathering evidence before Morrison figured out what I was doing. Atsa took the portfolio but did not open it immediately. His warrior's training telling him to remain suspicious, even as his heart began to believe that this woman might represent the key to saving not just the missing children, but to striking a blow against the system that had been slowly destroying his people. "If what you say is true," he said slowly, "then helping you means declaring war not just on Morrison and his men, but on everyone who profits from this trafficking, including powerful men in Santa Fe and maybe even Washington." Lily nodded, her expression growing grim. "I know what I'm asking. I know that by helping me, you'll be painting a target on yourself that will never fade. But those children, your children, they're suffering in ways that would break your heart, and without your help, without someone who knows this territory and can move unseen, they'll never be free." For a long moment, Atsa stood in silence, weighing his options, understanding that whatever choice he made in this cavern would determine not only his own fate, but potentially the fate of his entire people. The ancient ways taught that all life was connected, that the suffering of children anywhere was the responsibility of all warriors everywhere. But the practical reality of life in 1876 demanded careful calculation of risks and benefits. Finally, he opened the portfolio and began examining its contents by the dim light filtering through the crack in the cavern ceiling. And what he saw there made his hands tremble with rage, and his heart burn with a determination that would drive him across 3 territories and into dangers he could not yet imagine. "We will help you," he said finally, his voice carrying the weight of a sacred vow. "But first, we must get you out of this place and back to my people. And then we must plan very carefully how to wage war against enemies who have the law on their side and money enough to buy any justice they need." As he helped Lily toward the cavern entrance, both of them knowing that their alliance would likely mean death for at least one of them before this story reached its end, Atsa could not shake the feeling that something much larger than either of them had been set in motion by their meeting in the darkness beneath Mesa Encantada. The journey to Atsa's hidden camp took 3 hours of careful travel through terrain that would have challenged even experienced cavalry scouts, following deer paths and ancient native trails that wound through towering red rock formations and across stretches of desert so barren that not even the hardiest desert plants could find purchase in the sun-baked earth. Lily rode behind Atsa on Thunderwalker, her arms wrapped around his lean waist as they navigated narrow ledges carved into cliff faces by centuries of wind and water. Her body pressed against his back in a way that reminded both of them that despite their alliance born of necessity, they remained natural enemies in a war that had been raging since before either of them was born. The heat of the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as they climbed higher into the mesas, and Lily found herself marveling at Atsa's ability to find paths where she could see none, to read the landscape like a book written in stone and shadow, guiding them through mazes of rock that would have left her hopelessly lost within minutes. As they rode, Atsa shared fragments of information about his people's situation, painting a picture of desperate communities scattered across the high desert, families trying to maintain traditional ways of life while avoiding both cavalry patrols and Apache war parties that had been driven to increasing violence by their own desperation. "My grandfather's band numbers 43 people," he told her during a brief rest in the shade of an overhanging cliff, "including 12 children under the age of 15. We move our camp every few days to avoid detection, but the territory we can safely use grows smaller each month as more soldiers arrive from the east." Lily studied his profile as he scanned the desert below them for signs of pursuit, noting the way his jaw tightened when he spoke of the children, understanding that for all his warrior's reputation, Atsa Goldtooth was fundamentally a protector, a man who had dedicated his life to keeping his people safe in an increasingly dangerous world. "The children you mentioned in the portfolio," he continued, "3 of them are from our band, taken during a trading expedition to Gallup 6 weeks ago, my cousin's daughter among them, a girl named Morning Star who had just seen her 13th summer." The pain in his voice was unmistakable, and Lily felt a sharp stab of guilt as she realized that her own organization, the Pinkerton Detective Agency, had likely been instrumental in facilitating the very crimes she was now trying to expose. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, meaning it more deeply than she had meant anything in years. "I know that doesn't change what's been done, but I want you to know that when I took this assignment, I thought I was helping to bring peace to the territory. I had no idea what Morrison and his people were really doing." Atza turned to look at her directly, his dark eyes searching her face for signs of deception. "Your people have a saying about good intentions and the road to hell, I think. But perhaps some roads can be traveled in both directions if one is willing to pay the price for turning around." So, as they resumed their journey, Lily found herself reflecting on the path that had brought her to this moment. Riding through hostile territory with a Navajo warrior whose people had every reason to hate everything she represented. She had been raised in Philadelphia, the daughter of a federal judge who had instilled in her a deep belief in the importance of law and order, justice and civilization. Concepts that had seemed clear and absolute until she had come west and seen how they were being applied in practice. Her recruitment by the Pinkerton Agency had felt like a natural extension of her father's work. An opportunity to bring justice to a lawless frontier where good people suffered while criminals prospered. But 3 months in New Mexico had shown her that the lines between law and lawlessness, between civilization and barbarism, were far more complex than her Eastern education had prepared her to understand. "There it is," Atza said, pointing toward what appeared to be nothing more than a jumble of red rocks at the base of a towering mesa. "My grandfather's camp, hidden in plain sight, where cavalry scouts would never think to look." As they approached, Lily began to make out the subtle signs of human habitation concealed among the rocks. Wisps of smoke from carefully banked fires, the flutter of fabric hung to dry in hidden alcoves, and eventually, the faces of people emerging from concealed shelters to watch their approach. The reception was not entirely welcoming. Children disappeared behind their mothers' skirts, while men emerged with weapons in hand, their expressions making it clear that the presence of a white woman in their sanctuary was neither expected nor appreciated. Atza raised his hand in a gesture of peace and called out in the Navajo language, his words too rapid and complex for Lily to follow, but their effect was immediate, the visible tension among the camp's defenders easing as he explained the circumstances of their arrival. An elderly man with deeply weathered features and silver hair braided with turquoise beads stepped forward, his bearing suggesting that this was the grandfather Atza had mentioned, the leader of this band of refugees. The conversation between grandfather and grandson was lengthy and conducted entirely in Navajo, with occasional glances in Lily's direction that ranged from suspicious to openly hostile, making it clear that her presence was a subject of considerable debate. Finally, Atza turned back to her, his expression troubled. "My grandfather, Hastin Yazi, agrees that you may remain in our camp while we examine the evidence you carry. But he says that many of our people have suffered at the hands of Pinkerton agents, and trust will not come easily." Lily nodded, understanding that she was being granted sanctuary among people who had every reason to consider her an enemy. "I'm grateful for whatever safety you can provide. And I understand that I'll need to prove my intentions through actions, not just words." She was assigned a small shelter on the outskirts of the camp, a carefully constructed hiding place built into a natural cave and camouflaged with brush and stone, where she would be both protected and isolated until the band's leaders could decide what to do with her. That evening, as the desert air cooled and cooking fires were lit in concealed fire pits that directed their smoke up through natural chimneys in the rock, Lily found herself the object of intense curiosity from the camp's children, who would dart close to stare at her pale skin and golden hair before scampering away with nervous giggles. One child, a girl of perhaps 10 years with intelligent dark eyes and intricate beadwork on her dress, lingered longer than the others, studying Lily with the kind of direct assessment that seemed wise beyond her years. "You are the white woman who knows about the stolen children," the girl said in careful English, her words carrying a gravity that seemed incongruous with her youth. "My brother was taken by the men with badges. They said he would be educated in the white man's ways, but he has not returned." Lily knelt to bring herself to the child's eye level. "What is your name?" she asked gently. "I'm called Bright Feather," the girl replied. "And my brother's name is Running Wolf. He was taken from the mission school at Santa Fe 3 months ago. The teachers said he was being transferred to a better school. But we have heard nothing since." The pain in the child's voice was heartbreaking, and Lily felt her resolve harden as she realized that the evidence in her portfolio represented not just abstract crimes, but the destruction of individual families, the theft of children from parents who would never stop searching for them. "I promise you, Bright Feather," she said, meeting the girl's eyes directly, "I will do everything in my power to help find your brother and bring him home, but it will be dangerous work, and it may take time." The girl nodded solemnly, then reached into a small pouch at her belt and withdrew a piece of turquoise carved in the shape of a bird. "This was my brother's. He left it with me for safekeeping. If you find him, show him this, so he will know that his sister sent you." Later that night, as Lily sat by a small fire outside her shelter, studying the documents in her portfolio by firelight and making notes about potential courses of action, Atsa approached and settled beside her with the easy grace of a man completely comfortable in the wilderness. "Bright Feather spoke with you," he observed. "She does not usually trust strangers so quickly, but she has been carrying a heavy burden since Running Wolf disappeared." "She gave me this," Lily said, showing him the carved turquoise bird, "as a token to prove to her brother that she sent me. If we can find him." Atsa examined the carving in the firelight, his expression softening. "Running Wolf made this for her last winter. He has skilled hands for one so young. It would have brought him great joy to know his sister treasures his gift. Would have." Lily caught the past tense. "Do you think he's dead?" "I pray he is not," Atsa replied, "but the mining camps are dangerous places. Children do not last long in the deep tunnels, and those who survive often wish they had not." They sat in companionable silence for several minutes, both lost in their own thoughts, before Atsa spoke again. "My grandfather wishes to hear your testimony tomorrow morning before the full council of elders. You should be prepared to answer difficult questions and to provide proof of everything you have claimed." "Chinseu." "I understand," Lily replied, "and I want you to know that I'm prepared to accept whatever judgment your people render, even if it means they decide I'm too dangerous to let live." Atsa studied her face in the firelight. "You would accept death rather than break faith with your word." "And I've seen too much to go back to the person I was before I learned the truth," she said quietly. "If I can't help stop this trafficking ring, then I'd rather die trying than live with the knowledge that I could have made a difference and chose not to." "That is the thinking of a warrior," Atsa said with something like approval in his voice. "Perhaps there is hope for an alliance between us after all." The next morning dawned clear and bright, with the kind of brilliant blue sky that seemed to stretch endlessly across the high desert, and Lily found herself facing a semicircle of 12 tribal elders, men and women whose weathered faces bore the accumulated wisdom of decades spent surviving in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Hastian Yazi sat at the center of the group, his silver hair gleaming in the morning sun, while Atsa stood to one side, serving as translator for discussions that moved seamlessly between English and Navajo. "The council wishes to know," Atsa translated, "why you, a white woman trained to hunt our people, should be trusted with information that could lead to the destruction of this camp and the death of everyone in it." Lily had spent most of the night preparing for this question, and she answered without hesitation. Because I have already betrayed my own people by refusing to report this camp's location to my superiors, because I have chosen to share evidence that could hang me for treason, and because the children being sold into slavery include white children as well as native children, making this a crime against all humanity. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. One of the elder women spoke in Navajo, her tone sharp and challenging, and Atsa translated, "Grandmother Two Bears asks how we can be certain that you are not simply a more clever spy, sent to infiltrate our communities and gather intelligence for future military actions." "Because," Lily replied, reaching into her portfolio and withdrawing a thick sheaf of papers, "these documents contain enough evidence to destroy the trafficking operation and implicate dozens of government officials, including my own superiors, and I'm prepared to give them to you, regardless of whether you choose to help me or not." The elders conferred among themselves in rapid Navajo, their voices rising and falling in animated debate, while Lily waited with growing tension, understanding that her fate and the fate of the missing children hung in the balance of their deliberations. Finally, Hastinyazi spoke directly to her in careful English, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "We will examine your evidence, and if it proves genuine, we will consider what action might be taken, but you should understand that helping you will likely mean war with the territorial government, and war means death for many of our people." "I understand the cost," Lily replied, "but the alternative is allowing this evil to continue, watching more children disappear into slavery while we do nothing to stop it, and I don't think any of us can live with that choice." As the council meeting concluded and the elders dispersed to examine the evidence she had provided, Lily found herself alone with Atsa beside the small stream that provided the camp's water supply. "What happens now?" she asked, watching the clear water flow over smooth stones worn by centuries of desert floods. "Now we wait," Atsa replied, "and we prepare for the possibility that when the sun rises tomorrow, we will be committed to a path that leads either to victory or to death, with very little possibility of anything in between." The decision came at dawn, delivered by Hastinyazi himself as the first rays of sunlight painted the red rocks gold, and the desert began its daily transformation from the cool sanctuary of night into the merciless furnace of day. "The council has examined your evidence," the old man said to Lily, his weathered hands holding the leather portfolio that contained 3 months of her dangerous investigation. "And we have found truth in your words, but truth alone is not enough to save the children who suffer while we debate in safety." Atsa stood beside his grandfather, his face painted for war with traditional designs in white clay and red ochre. The Winchester rifle across his back, supplemented now by a cavalry saber taken from a dead soldier, and a bandolier of ammunition that marked him as a warrior prepared for extended battle. "We ride today," Atsa announced, his voice carrying a new authority that spoke of decisions made and accepted. "But not to the mining camps where the children are held. Those places are too heavily guarded and too far from help. Instead, we go to intercept the next shipment of stolen children before they reach the mines." Lily felt her pulse quicken, understanding that the careful planning phase was over and the real danger was about to begin. "How do you know when and where the next shipment will be?" "Because," Hastinyazi said with grim satisfaction, "your portfolio contained more information than you realized, including a coded schedule of pickups and deliveries. Your partner Morrison was very thorough in his record-keeping, perhaps too thorough for his own good." The old man spread a hand-drawn map on the ground between them, its surface marked with symbols and notations that represented months of intelligence gathering by Navajo scouts who moved unseen through the territorial wilderness. "Here," he said, pointing to a location marked with a red X. "At Skeleton Creek, 3 days' ride to the southeast. Morrison's men will meet with a supply wagon from the Bosque Redondo reservation, officially carrying educational supplies for the government schools, actually carrying 12 native children between the ages of 8 and 15. Lily studied the map, her mind automatically calculating distances and travel times, supply requirements and potential complications. The analytical skills that had made her valuable to the Pinkerton agency, now serving a very different purpose. "That's almost 200 miles of open desert," she observed. "With cavalry patrols, Apache war parties, and territorial marshals all looking for us. How do we get there without being detected or killed?" "We split into 3 groups," Atza explained, kneeling beside the map and tracing different routes with his finger. "Small, fast-moving parties that can cover ground quickly and avoid detection, converging on Skeleton Creek from different directions to surround the meeting site." The plan was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications, requiring precise timing, perfect coordination, and more than a little luck to succeed without resulting in the deaths of everyone involved. "I will lead the primary assault team," Atza continued. 5 warriors with rifles and sufficient ammunition for extended combat, approaching from the north where the terrain provides the best cover for the initial attack. "My brother's son Joseph Yazzie will lead the second group from the east," Hastin Yazzie added. 4 younger men with horses trained for rapid escape. Their job is to secure the children and get them to safety once the shooting starts. Lily waited for them to explain her role in the operation. But as the silence stretched, she began to understand that they expected her to remain in camp, safely hidden while others risked their lives to rescue children whose suffering she had documented. "What about me?" she asked finally. "Surely I can contribute more than just information. I'm trained in combat and survival, and I know Morrison's methods better than anyone." Atza and his grandfather exchanged a look that spoke volumes about their assessment of her abilities and their concerns about bringing a white woman into direct combat against her former colleagues. "This is not a job for someone who hesitates to kill," Atza said bluntly. "Morrison and his men will not show mercy to any of us, and they will show particular cruelty to you as a traitor to your own people. Are you prepared to shoot to kill when the time comes?" The question hung in the desert air like smoke from a distant fire, and Lily found herself confronting a reality she had managed to avoid during her months of investigation. The inevitable moment when her transformation from law enforcement officer to outlaw would be sealed in blood. "I've never killed anyone," she admitted quietly, "but I've seen what Morrison does to children, what those mining operations do to young bodies and spirits. Yes, I'm prepared to kill to stop it." "Words are easy," Hastin Yazzie observed, "but the moment when you must choose between your conscience and your survival reveals who you truly are, and that moment is coming sooner than you might prefer." The old man was right, and they all knew it. The next few days would test not just their tactical skills and physical courage, but their fundamental commitment to the values they claimed to represent. "There is another consideration," Atza said, his voice taking on a new gravity. "The third group, the one that will approach from the west and serve as our escape route if the operation goes badly. That group will be led by you." Lily felt shock wash through her system like cold water. "You're putting me in command of warriors?" "2 warriors and 3 older boys who need to prove themselves in combat," Atza clarified. "Men who can follow orders and handle weapons, but who will need leadership when the chaos begins." The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders like a physical burden, understanding that the lives of her team members and the success of the entire rescue operation might depend on decisions she would have to make under fire. "Why me?" she asked, genuinely puzzled. "Surely one of your experienced warriors would be better suited to command." "Because," Hastin Yazzie said with something that might have been approval in his voice, "you are the only one among us who has studied Morrison's tactical methods, who understands how government agents think and react under pressure. Your knowledge makes you more valuable as a field commander than as a simple rifle." The preparation took 2 full days. Time spent in intensive training that pushed Lily's physical and mental capabilities to their limits and beyond, learning to move silently through desert terrain, to read the subtle signs that revealed the presence of enemies or prey, and to coordinate complex maneuvers using hand signals and bird calls. Her team consisted of 2 seasoned warriors in their 30s, men named Tom Bigay and Charlie Yazzie, who had fought both Apache raiders and cavalry patrols, and 3 younger men, barely out of their teens, who burned with the desire to prove themselves worthy of warrior status. The youngest, a 17-year-old called Swift Arrow, reminded her painfully of her own younger brother back in Philadelphia. The same eager intelligence and reckless courage that made her simultaneously proud of his spirit and terrified for his safety. The key to success, Tom Bigay explained during one of their training sessions, is not to fight harder than your enemies, but to fight smarter, to use their expectations against them and strike where they are weakest. Charlie Yazzie, a man of few words but obvious competence, demonstrated the finer points of desert camouflage, showing Lily how to use available terrain and vegetation to become effectively invisible even at close range. "White soldiers look for what they expect to see," he said, applying mud and plant dyes to her face and hands until she blended seamlessly with the red rocks and sparse vegetation. "They expect Indians to look like the pictures in their books. When you look like the desert itself, they cannot see you." The night before their departure, as the camp settled into the watchful quiet that preceded dangerous operations, Lily found herself unable to sleep, her mind racing through 1,000 potential complications and contingencies. She was sitting by the dying embers of a fire, cleaning and checking her weapons for the 10th time when Bright Feather approached, moving with the silent grace that seemed natural to all the children in the camp. "You are afraid," the girl observed, settling beside Lily with the directness of youth. "It is good to be afraid before battle, my grandmother says. It keeps you alive when courage alone would get you killed." "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman," Lily replied, surprised by the comfort she found in the child's presence. "Are you afraid for us?" "I am afraid for my brother," Bright Feather admitted. "If your rescue fails, Morrison's people will know that someone is hunting them. They might kill the children they hold rather than risk losing them to another rescue attempt." The possibility had occurred to Lily as well, adding another layer of pressure to an operation that was already balanced on the edge of disaster. But she had chosen not to voice her concerns, hoping to maintain the confidence of her team members. "We won't fail," she said, trying to project more certainty than she felt. "Your brother will come home, I promise." "Do not make promises you cannot keep," Bright Feather said with startling maturity. "But know that even if you fail, even if my brother does not return, you will have tried to help him, and that matters more than you might think." The next morning came too soon, and not soon enough, with the 3 teams departing before dawn to begin their convergent approaches to Skeleton Creek, each group taking a different route through terrain that would challenge even experienced desert travelers. Lily's team rode southeast through country that seemed designed by a hostile god to test human endurance. Across alkali flats, where the salt-crusted earth reflected the sun's heat with blinding intensity. Up rocky escarpments, where a single misstep could send horse and rider tumbling to death on the jagged stones below. The first day passed without incident, their small party making good time across relatively open ground. But as they approached the more populated areas around the territorial roads, the risk of detection increased dramatically. "Dust cloud to the northeast," Swift Arrow called out, his young eyes spotting the telltale sign of riders long before Lily or the older warriors could see them. "Looks like a cavalry patrol, maybe 8 or 10 men." Tom Bigay immediately led them toward a collection of red rock pillars that would provide concealment, their horses picking their way carefully through loose scree and around massive boulders until they reached a hidden canyon where they could wait for the soldiers to pass. "How did you know this place was here?" Lily asked, marveling at the way the canyon mouth was completely invisible until you were directly in front of it. Apache hunters used this canyon for generations, Charlie Yazzie explained, before the cavalry drove them south. They taught some of our young men the secret paths through this country in exchange for horses and ammunition. The cavalry patrol passed without detecting their presence, but the encounter served as a sobering reminder of how quickly their mission could turn from rescue operation to running battle if they were discovered by hostile forces. That evening, as they made a cold camp in a sheltered arroyo where their small fire would be invisible from more than a few hundred yards away, Tom Begay approached Lily with news that made her blood run cold. "I scouted ahead while we waited for the soldiers to pass," he reported. "There's a problem at Skeleton Creek. Morrison has more men than we expected. At least 20 armed guards instead of the 8 or 10 shown in his reports." The implications were immediate and terrifying. Their carefully planned operation had been based on intelligence that was either outdated or deliberately false, leaving them facing odds that would make success virtually impossible. "It could be a trap," Swift Arrow suggested, his hand moving instinctively to the rifle at his side. "Maybe Morrison discovered that his records were compromised. Maybe he's using the children as bait to draw us into an ambush. Or maybe," Charlie Yazzie said quietly, "he's simply being more careful because he knows someone is hunting him. Either way, we are committed now. Atza and Joseph's teams are already moving into position." Lily stared into the small fire, watching the flames dance and flicker while her mind raced through rapidly shrinking options, understanding that whatever decision she made in the next few minutes would determine not just the fate of her team, but potentially the lives of 12 innocent children. "We continue as planned," she said finally, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice, "but we modify our approach. Instead of serving as the escape route, we become the distraction. We hit them from the west just before Atza launches his main assault, draw their fire and attention while Joseph's team gets to the children." The plan was desperate, bordering on suicidal. But as Tom Begay nodded approval and Charlie Yazzie began checking his weapons, Lily realized that somewhere during the past few days, she had stopped being a Pinkerton agent trying to do the right thing and had become something else entirely, something harder and more dangerous. "Tomorrow we find out what we're really made of," she said, speaking as much to herself as to her team. "And those children find out whether their prayers for rescue were heard by anyone who matters." The attack began at precisely noon, when the desert sun reached its merciless peak and heat waves rose from the alkali flats like the spirits of the dead seeking vengeance. The moment when Morrison's guards would be at their most uncomfortable and least alert, squinting against the blazing light that turned the world into a shimmering mirage of suffering. Lily crouched behind a sandstone outcropping 300 yards west of the meeting point, her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched through field glasses borrowed from a dead cavalry officer, counting the armed men positioned around the supply wagons where 12 native children sat bound and silent in the killing heat. 23 guards, she whispered to Tom Begay, who lay prone beside her with his rifle already sighted on the nearest target. "Not 20 like we thought. Morrison brought extra men. Probably suspects something." Swift Arrow, positioned 10 yards to her left behind a cluster of barrel cactus, raised his hand in the signal that meant Atza's team was in position on the northern ridge, while Charlie Yazzie's answering gesture from the southern approach confirmed that Joseph's rescue team was ready to move the instant the shooting started. The children in the wagons looked like broken dolls, their small bodies wilted by heat and despair, their traditional clothing replaced by the rough canvas shirts and pants that marked them as property rather than people. And Lily felt rage build in her chest like a living thing seeking release. Among them, she could see a boy who matched the description Bright Feather had given her of her brother Running Wolf. Though at this distance and in their current condition, positive identification was impossible. All of the children looked equally hollow-eyed and defeated. Morrison himself stood in the shade of the supply wagon's canvas cover, a tall man with the pale skin of someone who spent too much time indoors and the soft belly of someone who let others do his fighting, his voice carrying clearly across the desert as he argued with the wagon master about payment and delivery schedules. "The mines are paying premium prices for young workers," Morrison was saying, his tone carrying the casual cruelty of a man discussing livestock. "But they want guarantees about durability. Children who will last at least 6 months in the deep shafts before they break down completely." The wagon master, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained teeth and clothes that suggested he had been living rough for weeks, spat into the dust and shook his head. "These reservation kids are soft, not like the Apache children we used to get. They don't have the fighting spirit that makes for good workers." "Fighting spirit can be broken," Morrison replied, with the confidence of a man who had broken many spirits. "The mining foremen know how to handle difficult children. A few weeks in the punishment cells usually teaches them proper respect for authority." Lily's finger tightened on her rifle trigger as she listened to these men discuss the systematic destruction of children's lives as if they were negotiating the price of cattle, understanding that whatever happened in the next few minutes, she could never return to the civilized world that had produced such casual evil. The signal came as the sound of a red-tailed hawk's cry echoing across the desert, Atsa's call to begin the attack. And Lily raised her rifle just as Tom Bigay's first shot cracked across the silence like the voice of an angry god. The guard nearest to Morrison's position spun and fell, blood spreading across his chest as he hit the ground, while the wagon master dove for cover behind the nearest wheel, his hand clawing for the pistol at his hip. Chaos erupted across the meeting site as guards scrambled for weapons and cover, their shouts of alarm and confusion mixing with the screams of terrified horses and the crack of rifle fire that seemed to come from all directions at once. Lily's first shot took down a guard who was raising his rifle toward the northern ridge where Atsa's team was positioned, her bullet catching him in the shoulder and spinning him away from his weapon, while her second shot shattered the water barrel he had been using for cover. Swift Arrow proved that his marksmanship was as good as his eyesight, his rifle speaking 3 times in rapid succession to drop 3 guards who had been trying to organize a defensive line, each shot placed with the precision of a hunter who had never wasted ammunition in his life. From the northern ridge, Atsa's warriors poured devastating fire into the guards' positions, their superior elevation and carefully chosen firing positions allowing them to dominate the battlefield, despite being outnumbered more than 3 to 1. But Morrison's men were not the soft town dwellers that Lily had hoped for. They were experienced fighters, possibly former soldiers or frontier lawmen, and they recovered from their initial surprise with professional efficiency that made the battle far more dangerous than anticipated. "Cover the children," Morrison screamed over the gunfire, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and fear. "Don't let them get to the wagons." Several guards immediately shifted their positions to create a protective screen around the supply wagons, using the vehicles and the children themselves as shields against the attacking warriors, a tactical move that complicated the rescue operation immeasurably. Charlie Yazzie appeared from the southern approach like a ghost materialized from the desert air, his knife flashing in the sunlight as he took down 2 guards who had been focused on the rifle fire from the other directions, his movement so fluid and deadly that he was gone again before anyone could return fire. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The desert air, filling with gun smoke and dust kicked up by running feet and falling bodies, while the sun beat down mercilessly on a scene that would have challenged Dante's imagination for sheer brutality. Lily found herself in the strange, heightened state of consciousness that combat veterans described, where time seemed to slow and every detail became crystal clear. The way sweat beaded on Morrison's face as he shouted orders, the precise pattern of wood splinters flying from a wagon wheel struck by rifle fire. Her third shot was aimed at Morrison himself, But the Indian agent threw himself sideways at the last instant, her bullet passing close enough to his head to part his hair, but not close enough to end his miserable existence. "There!" Tom Begay pointed toward the eastern side of the battlefield, where Joseph Yazzie and his rescue team were making their move toward the wagons, running in a crouched sprint that kept them below the level of the worst gunfire. But Morrison had anticipated this exact strategy, and as Joseph's team approached the children, a withering crossfire opened up from concealed positions among the rocks. Bullets kicking up geysers of dust and stone fragments that forced the rescue team to take cover short of their objective. Swift Arrow suddenly stood up from his concealment, his young face set in lines of determination that belonged on a much older man. "I'm going for the children," he shouted, and before anyone could stop him, he was running toward the wagons with his rifle held high. "No!" Lily screamed, understanding that the boy's courage was about to get him killed. But Swift Arrow was already committed to his charge, weaving between obstacles with the desperate speed of youth and righteousness. Tom Begay's rifle spoke repeatedly as he provided covering fire for the boy's suicidal run, his bullets forcing several guards to duck for cover. But there were too many enemies and too much open ground for one warrior to cover effectively. Swift Arrow made it within 20 yards of the nearest wagon before a guard's bullet caught him in the leg, sending him tumbling into the dust where he lay exposed to fire from multiple directions, his rifle spinning away across the ground. The sight of the wounded boy lying helpless in the killing ground triggered something primal in Lily's mind. A fury that burned away all thought of personal safety or tactical considerations, leaving only the need to protect someone who had trusted her leadership. She vaulted over her rock shelter and ran toward Swift Arrow's position, her rifle firing as fast as she could work the action, not bothering to aim carefully, but simply laying down, suppressing fire that might keep the guards' heads down long enough for her to reach the wounded boy. Bullets whined past her ears and kicked up dust at her feet as she ran, but none found their mark, and she reached Swift Arrow's position just as Tom Begay and Charlie Yazzie appeared from different directions, all three of them converging on the wounded warrior's location. "Can you move?" Lily gasped, dropping to one knee beside Swift Arrow while continuing to fire at targets of opportunity. "My leg is broken," the boy replied through gritted teeth, his face pale with pain and shock. "But I can still shoot if you get me to cover." Tom Begay grabbed Swift Arrow under the arms, while Charlie Yazzie provided covering fire, and together they began dragging the wounded boy toward a pile of boulders that would offer better protection than their current exposed position. But Morrison had recognized the tactical situation and was moving to exploit it, sending 6 of his best men in a flanking movement that would cut off their escape route and trap them in a killing zone with no hope of survival. "We're about to be surrounded," Charlie Yazzie called out, his voice carrying clearly despite the ongoing gunfire. "If we don't move now, we'll all die here." Lily looked toward the wagons where the children still sat bound and terrified, understanding that this might be their only chance to complete the rescue, but also understanding that staying meant certain death for her entire team. The choice was taken out of her hands when Atza Goldtooth appeared as if conjured from the desert air itself, his war paint streaked with sweat and dust, his rifle smoking from continuous use, his dark eyes blazing with the kind of fury that had made his people legendary warriors. "Get Swift Arrow out of here," he commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Joseph's team has the children. The rescue is complete." As if to prove his words, the sound of children's voices rose above the gunfire. Not screams of terror, but cries of joy and relief, as Joseph Yazzie and his warriors cut their bonds and began leading them toward waiting horses. Running Wolf was among them, his face gaunt but his spirit unbroken, and as he passed Lily's position, he pressed something into her hand, the small turquoise bird that Brightfeather had given her, somehow preserved through months of captivity and suffering. "Tell my sister," he gasped, his voice barely audible above the continuing battle. "Tell her that her brother remembers the song she taught him, And that thinking of home kept me alive. The retreat began in stages, with Atsa's warriors providing covering fire, while Joseph's team escorted the rescued children to safety, their movements coordinated with the precision of men who had fought together through many battles. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Morrison's surviving guards pursued them for nearly a mile across the desert. But desert warfare was not their strength, and gradually the sound of gunfire faded behind them as the rescue parties outdistanced their pursuers. By evening, they had reached a predetermined rendezvous point where fresh horses and medical supplies waited. Swift Arrow's leg was set and splinted by a traditional healer who had made the journey specifically to tend wounded warriors. "The boy will walk again," the healer assured Lily. "Though he may always favor that leg, he showed great courage today, courage that will be remembered in the songs of his people." As the rescued children were reunited with family members who had made the dangerous journey to meet them, Lily found herself sitting apart from the celebration, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they had accomplished and the price that had been paid. Atsa joined her as the desert stars began to appear in the darkening sky. His war paint washed away, but his face still bearing the marks of a man who had looked into the heart of evil and emerged victorious. "You fought well today," he said quietly, like a true warrior, without thought for your own safety when others needed protection. "I almost got Swift Arrow killed," Lily replied, the weight of command settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. "My decisions, my leadership nearly cost him his life." "But they didn't," Atsa pointed out, "and because of your courage, 12 children will sleep in their own homes tonight instead of in mining camp barracks. That is worth the risk of one warrior's life, even a life as precious as Swift Arrow's." In the distance, Running Wolf sat beside his sister Brightfeather, both of them holding the turquoise bird that had served as a token of hope through the darkest times, their quiet conversation carrying the sound of healing beginning to take root. "This is only the beginning," Lily said, understanding that their victory at Skeleton Creek had been just the first battle in a much larger war. Morrison escaped, and there are other mining operations, other children being held in slavery. "Yes," Atsa agreed, "but now they know they are being hunted, and they know that their victims have protectors who will not be stopped by fear or superior numbers." As the celebration continued around them, and the rescued children began to rediscover what it meant to be free, Lily felt a profound change taking place in her heart. The final transformation from law enforcement officer to something much more dangerous and much more necessary. "What do we do now?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Now we hunt them all," Atsa replied, his voice carrying the implacable determination of a man who had found his true purpose. "Every last one of them, until no child in this territory lives in fear of being stolen from their family." The war was far from over, but the first victory belonged to the children, and in the desert night. That was enough to kindle hope that had seemed impossible just hours before. 3 months after the battle at Skeleton Creek, the territorial newspapers carried stories of mysterious attacks on mining operations across New Mexico, armed raids that freed child workers and left behind calling cards written in both English and Navajo that promised death to anyone who profited from the suffering of innocents. The stories had grown in the telling, transforming Lily Winters from a disgraced Pinkerton agent into a folk hero whose exploits were recounted in saloons from Santa Fe to Denver. A white woman who commanded Navajo warriors and struck terror into the hearts of men who thought their wealth and connections made them untouchable. But Morrison had not remained idle during those 3 months, using his connections in the territorial government to bring in federal marshals and a full company of cavalry soldiers, transforming the child trafficking operation from a criminal enterprise into what he claimed was a legitimate response to Apache terrorism threatening peaceful mining communities. The Indian agent had also learned from his defeats. studying the tactics that had cost him so many men and so much money, adapting his defenses to counter the hit-and-run strategies that had made Lily and Atsa's war party so effective against isolated targets. Intelligence gathered by Navajo scouts revealed that Morrison had consolidated his remaining operations at Silver Canyon, a remote mining complex carved into the mountains north of Santa Fe, where he had spent a fortune turning the entire facility into a fortress designed to withstand siege by any force the Navajo could bring against it. The final confrontation came on a cold November morning, when the high desert air carried the promise of winter, and the aspens on the mountainsides had turned gold as Spanish treasure, their leaves rustling in the wind like whispered prayers for the children who labored in darkness far below the earth's surface. Atsa Goldtooth crouched on a ridge overlooking the mining camp, his spyglass revealing the full extent of Morrison's preparations. Guard towers positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire, heavy machine guns mounted on platforms that commanded every approach to the canyon, and most troubling of all, at least 30 children visible working under armed supervision in the open pit sections of the mine. "He's using them as human shields," Lily observed, lying prone beside him with her own field glasses, her voice tight with controlled fury that had been building through months of witnessing atrocities that would have broken lesser spirits. "He knows we won't risk harming the children, so he's keeping them in the open where any attack would put them in danger." The mining operation itself was a marvel of criminal engineering and defensive planning, multiple levels carved into the mountainside and connected by narrow walkways and rope bridges that would be easy to defend and nearly impossible to assault. While the main entrance was protected by a Gatling gun position that could cut down charging horsemen like wheat before a harvester's blade. 47 guards that I can count, Atsa reported, his voice carrying the professional assessment of a warrior who had studied many battlefields and learned to read the subtle signs that distinguished veteran fighters from mere hired gunmen. Plus Morrison and at least 6 men in civilian clothes who are probably federal agents. The odds are worse than anything we've faced before. Stone fortifications had been built at key positions throughout the canyon, creating a series of defensive positions that would require separate assaults to overcome, while the narrow canyon walls themselves had been modified with carved firing positions that would allow defenders to rain bullets down on attackers with devastating effect. Behind them, the combined war party represented the largest gathering of Navajo warriors in decades, over 60 men from 7 different bands, united by their commitment to ending the traffic in stolen children and their respect for the unlikely partnership between Atsa Goldtooth and the white woman who had proven her courage in blood and fire. Each warrior had been carefully selected for specific skills, from Tom Begay's expertise with explosives to Charlie Yazzy's ability to move unseen through terrain that would challenge a ghost, their weapons representing the finest firearms that could be acquired through trade, raid, or purchase from sympathetic gun dealers. Joseph Yazzie approached their observation position with news that confirmed their worst fears, while also revealing new intelligence that might prove crucial to the success of their mission. "The supply wagons arrived this morning," he reported. 28 more children, including some who look no older than 6 or 7 years. They're being held in the lower levels where the air is bad and the work most dangerous. "But there's something else," Joseph continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "One of the children managed to escape during the transfer, a Apache girl named Desert Rose. She's hiding in the rocks about a mile south of here, and she has information about the mine's interior layout." The interview with Desert Rose took place in a sheltered arroyo where the girl could speak without fear of being overheard by enemy scouts, her thin body bearing the marks of months of brutal labor, while her eyes held the kind of ancient wisdom that suffering sometimes brings to the very young. "The tunnels connect everything," she explained in a mixture of Apache, Spanish, and broken English, drawing diagrams in the sand with a stick to illustrate the complex network of passages that honeycombed the mountain. But there are places where the mountain bleeds bad air. Places where children die if they work too long without seeing sky. Her information revealed that Morrison's fortress had a fatal weakness. The same network of tunnels that made the mining operation profitable also created dozens of potential entry points that could not all be defended simultaneously, especially if the defenders were focused on repelling what appeared to be a frontal assault, swift arrow, still favoring the leg that had been wounded at Skeleton Creek, but insisting on participating in what he called the final hunt, pointed toward movement near the main gate where a familiar figure had appeared. Morrison himself just came out to inspect the defenses. First time we've seen him in the open since we started hunting him. Through her field glasses, Lily could see the Indian agent clearly, his pale face flushed with heat and exertion as he moved from position to position, checking weapons and encouraging his men. The casual brutality that had made him wealthy now focused entirely on ensuring his own survival against enemies who had proven far more dangerous than he had ever anticipated. "He's planning something," she observed, noting the way Morrison kept checking a pocket watch and glancing toward the eastern horizon where dust clouds might indicate approaching reinforcements. Probably expecting cavalry support, or maybe planning to move the children again before we can mount an effective assault. The war council that followed brought together the most experienced warriors from each participating band, men whose combined knowledge of desert warfare, siege tactics, and the psychology of their enemies represented generations of accumulated wisdom about how to fight and win against superior numbers and equipment. The conference among the war party's leaders took place in a hidden arroyo where their voices would not carry to enemy ears. Representatives from each participating band, sharing intelligence and debating strategies that ranged from direct assault to extended siege warfare to elaborate deception operations that might trick Morrison into abandoning his fortress voluntarily. Hastian Yassi, despite his advanced age and the protests of younger warriors who feared for his safety, had insisted on joining the final battle, and his presence lent gravity to the proceedings that no younger leader could have provided, his weathered face reflecting decades of experience with both victory and defeat. "The children cannot wait for a perfect plan," he said, his weathered hands gesturing toward the mining camp where young voices could sometimes be heard crying in the wind. "Each day they remain in that place. More of their spirits die, even if we rescue their bodies. Some wounds to the soul never heal completely." Tom Begay, whose tactical skills had proven invaluable during their previous raids, and whose knowledge of explosives had been crucial to several successful rescues, spread a detailed map of the mining operation on the ground between them. The result of weeks of dangerous reconnaissance by scouts who had risked their lives to gather intelligence. "The direct approaches are suicide," he said bluntly, tracing the overlapping fields of fire that would turn the canyon mouth into a killing ground. "But there's an old mining tunnel that was abandoned when a section collapsed 3 years ago. If we can get through the blocked section, it would put us inside their perimeter without having to fight through the main defenses." Charlie Yazzie nodded agreement, his normally stoic expression showing rare animation as he described his recent scouting mission. "I explored that tunnel last week, moving only at night and covering my tracks carefully. The collapse is not complete. A small team could clear enough space to crawl through, but it would take time and make noise that might alert the guards if they're listening carefully." "What if the noise is intentional?" Lily asked, an idea beginning to form in her mind as she studied the map and considered the psychology of defenders who would be expecting a conventional assault. "What if we make them think the tunnel work is the main attack, while the real assault comes from another direction entirely?" The plan that emerged from their lengthy council was complex and dangerous, requiring precise timing and coordination between multiple teams operating in different parts of the canyon simultaneously. but it offered the best chance of rescuing the children while minimizing casualties among both the war party and their prisoners. The strategy called for a three-pronged approach that would stretch Morrison's defenses to the breaking point while creating multiple opportunities for the rescue teams to reach the children before the defenders could organize effective resistance as night fell across the high desert, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold that reminded every warrior present of the sacred nature of their mission. The final preparations began with a ceremony that honored both the fighters who would risk everything and the children who depended on their courage and skill. Sage smoke rose towards stars that had witnessed countless generations of Navajo prayers for protection and guidance, while traditional war songs echoed softly off the canyon walls, their ancient words carrying power that transcended the immediate tactical concerns of the coming battle. Lily found herself accepted fully into this ancient ritual, her face painted with traditional war designs by Brightfeather herself, who had insisted on joining the war party despite her youth and the protests of adults who feared for her safety. The girl carrying messages between the leaders and serving as a living symbol of what they were fighting to protect. The war paint felt strange on her skin, the ochre and white clay applied in patterns that had been used by Navajo warriors for centuries. But as the ceremony continued and she found herself chanting words in a language she barely understood, Lily felt a profound connection to something larger than herself, larger even than the immediate mission that had brought them all together. "If I do not survive tonight," Lily said to Atsa as they prepared their weapons for what might be the final battle of their unlikely partnership, checking ammunition and ensuring that every piece of equipment was ready for the demands that would be placed upon it. "I want you to know that these months with your people have been the most meaningful of my life. You've shown me what it means to fight for something larger than personal ambition or professional duty. Oh, you will survive," Atsa replied, with the confidence of a man who had seen her courage tested in fire and had never seen her fail when others depended on her leadership. "Because the children need you to survive. Because your people need to learn that justice is possible, even in this territory, where money usually outweighs morality and political connections matter more than human suffering." The attack began at precisely midnight with a series of explosions that lit up the canyon walls like lightning, Charlie Yazzie and his demolition team destroying the mining camp's water supply and power generators while creating the appearance of a full-scale assault from the eastern approach that would draw the defenders' attention away from the real infiltration routes. Morrison's guards responded exactly as predicted, their training and discipline evident as they moved quickly to defensive positions and began returning fire at targets they could barely see in the darkness. But their very competence worked against them as they focused on repelling what appeared to be the main attack. While the diversionary battle raged with increasing intensity, Tom Begay's tunnel team worked frantically to clear the blocked passage that would allow the real rescue force to penetrate the mining complex. Their progress measured in inches as they carefully removed debris that had been compacted by 3 years of settling and occasional rockfalls. The tunnel work was backbreaking and dangerous, with constant risk of cave-ins or gas pockets that could kill the workers instantly. But the warriors pressed forward with grim determination, knowing that dozens of children's lives hung in the balance of their success or failure. Lily led the primary assault team through the cleared tunnel, crawling through spaces so narrow that they had to remove their weapons and push them ahead. Their progress slowed by the need for absolute silence as they penetrated deeper into the mountain where enemy guards might be stationed at any turn. The air in the tunnel was thick and stifling, filled with dust that made breathing difficult and the kind of oppressive weight that came from being surrounded by millions of tons of solid rock. But they pressed forward, guided by Desert Rose's detailed descriptions of the passages that would lead them to the children's quarters. They emerged inside the mining complex just as the diversionary attack reached its crescendo. the sound of gunfire and explosions, echoing through the stone corridors, while the acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with the ever-present dust and the sour odor of human misery that seemed to permeate every corner of Morrison's underground empire. The interior of the mining operation was a vision from the deepest pit of hell. Children as young as 5 years old working in air so thick with dust that breathing was an effort. Their small bodies bent under loads that would have challenged grown men, their eyes reflecting the hopeless resignation of slaves who had forgotten what freedom looked like or felt like. Some of the children were so weakened by months of inadequate food and brutal labor that they could barely lift their heads when the rescue team appeared, while others reacted with terror, having learned to associate the appearance of armed adults with punishment and increased suffering. "We're here to take you home," Lily called out in both English and Spanish, her voice carrying over the sounds of ongoing battle above. "We're here to bring you back to your families. You're going to be free. Running wolf." Brightfeather's voice cut through the chaos as she spotted her brother among a group of children hauling ore carts along narrow-gauge rails. His face gaunt from months of inadequate food, but his spirit clearly unbroken by the brutality he had endured in Morrison's underground prison. The reunion between brother and sister provided the emotional catalyst that transformed the rescue operation into something approaching a miracle. As children who had given up hope suddenly understood that their families had not forgotten them, that warriors had indeed come to bring them home to sunlight and safety and the love they had thought was lost forever. But Morrison had not survived this long by underestimating his enemies or failing to prepare for every possible contingency. And as Lily's team began leading children toward the tunnel exit, his voice echoed through the mining complex over a speaking trumpet that amplified his words to fill every corner of the canyon with his desperate fury. "Attention, Navajo terrorists!" His voice boomed off the stone walls, carrying a note of rage and fear that suggested he knew his criminal empire was collapsing around him like the mine shafts he had used to destroy so many young lives. "I have explosive charges placed throughout this facility. If you do not surrender immediately and return my property, I will bring down the entire mountain and bury all of us." The threat was not empty bluster. Lily could see the telltale signs of prepared demolition charges placed strategically throughout the mining complex. Professionally installed explosive devices with enough combined power to collapse the entire tunnel system and bury everyone inside. Children and rescuers alike, under millions of tons of rock and rubble. "He's bluffing," Tom Bigay said, but his voice carried uncertainty that suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. His eyes scanning the visible charges and calculating the devastating power they represented. He wouldn't destroy his own operation. He's put too much money and effort into building this place. He would if he thought it was the only way to avoid hanging for his crimes, Lily replied grimly, understanding Morrison's psychology better than any of her companions after months of studying his methods and motivations. To him, dead children who can't testify against him are preferable to living witnesses who can send him to the gallows. The standoff stretched through several agonizing minutes, while children continued to stream toward the tunnel exit under the protection of warriors who formed a human shield around them. But time was running out as Morrison's surviving guards regrouped and began advancing on their position with the methodical precision of men who knew the layout better than their enemies. Atsa appeared from the shadows like an avenging spirit sent by the ancestors themselves, his rifle speaking death to two guards who had gotten too close to the tunnel entrance. But even his legendary marksmanship could not hold off the growing number of enemies converging on their position from multiple directions. "Take the children and go," he commanded, his voice carrying the absolute authority of a war leader who had earned the right to be obeyed without question. "I'll find Morrison and stop him from detonating those charges. The children must reach safety regardless of what happens to the rest of us." "Not alone you won't," Lily replied, checking her ammunition and realizing she had enough bullets left for perhaps 5 more minutes of sustained fighting. "If we're going to die tonight, we die together. And we take that monster with us to whatever hell awaits men who profit from children's suffering." The final hunt for Morrison led them through a maze of mining tunnels and processing chambers, following the sound of his voice as he continued to shout threats and demands over the speaking trumpet, his words echoing off stone walls like the ravings of a man who had finally been driven beyond the boundaries of sanity by the collapse of everything he had built. They found him in the main processing chamber, a vast cavern carved from living rock and filled with the machinery that had ground up the bodies and spirits of so many children. His hands clutching a detonator device that could collapse the entire facility with the simple press of a button. "The famous Lily Winters," Morrison said, his voice carrying a note of admiration mixed with hatred, sweat streaming down his pale face as he realized that his carefully constructed world of wealth and power was about to come crashing down around him. "And the legendary Atsa Goldtooth. How fitting that you should be here at the end. The 2 people who have caused me more trouble than all the territorial marshals and federal agents combined." His appearance had deteriorated dramatically since their last encounter at Skeleton Creek, his face gaunt from stress and lack of sleep. His once immaculate clothing now stained with sweat and the grime of a man who had been forced to live like a hunted animal. His eyes carrying the wild gleam of someone who had pushed himself past the breaking point. "It's over, Morrison," Lily said, her rifle trained on his chest while her finger rested lightly on the trigger, ready to end his miserable existence the moment he made any threatening move. "The children are free, your operation is destroyed, and every lawman in the territory will be hunting you for the rest of your miserable life." "Perhaps," Morrison replied with a smile that belonged on a death's head, his thumb hovering over the detonator button that would transform the mountain into a tomb for everyone within miles. "But I won't live to see my trial, and neither will you. This entire mountain is going to come down in about 30 seconds, taking all of us and any evidence of what happened here." His finger began to tighten on the detonator button, but before he could complete the motion that would have killed them all, a rifle shot cracked through the cavern with the finality of divine judgment, and Morrison spun sideways, the detonator flying from his nerveless fingers to clatter across the stone floor. Swift Arrow stood in the tunnel entrance, his wounded leg barely supporting his weight, but his rifle smoking from the shot that had saved them all. His young face bearing an expression of grim satisfaction that spoke of justice finally delivered after months of patient hunting. "That's for every child who suffered in this place," he said quietly, his voice carrying a maturity that had been earned through pain and courage. "And for every family that was torn apart by your greed." Morrison lay dying on the stone floor of his own creation, his life's blood seeping into rock that had already absorbed the tears and suffering of countless innocents. His final words a curse that echoed off the walls like the cry of a damned soul facing the judgment he had spent his life trying to avoid. The rescue operation concluded with all 68 children safely evacuated from the mining complex, their freedom purchased with the lives of 3 warriors who had died in the diversionary attack, but whose sacrifice had made possible the salvation of so many innocents. Their names to be remembered forever in the songs of their people. 6 months later, Lily Winters stood before a territorial judge in Santa Fe, testifying at the trial of 14 men connected to Morrison's trafficking operation. Her detailed evidence and careful documentation resulting in convictions and prison sentences that sent a message throughout the territory that such crimes would not be tolerated by civilized society. The children who had been rescued were slowly healing, their bodies recovering from months of abuse and malnutrition, while their spirits gradually remembered what it meant to be free, to play in sunlight instead of laboring in darkness, to sleep without fear of tomorrow's suffering. Bright Feather and Running Wolf had become symbols of resilience and hope throughout the territory. Their story, spreading not only through Navajo communities, but among white settlers who had begun to understand that the line between civilization and barbarism was not drawn along racial boundaries but through individual human hearts. Atsa Goldtooth received an official pardon from the territorial governor and an offer to serve as a liaison between the Navajo Nation and federal authorities. Recognition that his methods, while unconventional, had accomplished what years of conventional law enforcement had failed to achieve. But perhaps the most significant change was in Lily herself, who had discovered that true justice sometimes required stepping outside the boundaries of written law. That protecting the innocent was more important than following rules written by men who had never faced such moral complexity. On a crisp autumn morning, as she prepared to leave Santa Fe and return to the high desert country where she had found her true calling, Lily stood on the courthouse steps beside Atsa, watching Navajo families reunited with children who had never expected to see home again. "What will you do now?" Atsa asked, though both of them already knew the answer that had been written in their hearts during the long months of hunting monsters and protecting innocents. "The same thing you'll do," Lily replied, her hand resting on the rifle that had become as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. "Keep hunting monsters, keep protecting children, keep fighting for justice even when the law fails to provide it." They rode out of Santa Fe together as the sun painted the distant mesas gold and red. Two unlikely allies bound by shared purpose and mutual respect, heading toward a horizon where other battles waited, but where hope had proven stronger than hatred. Behind them, children played in the dusty streets while their parents watched with the relaxed vigilance of people who knew that somewhere in the desert, warriors were standing guard against the darkness that had once seemed so absolute. The story that had begun with a desperate cry for help in an abandoned mineshaft had become legend. Proof that courage could bridge any divide and that justice, though sometimes delayed, would always find its way to those who refused to stop fighting for what was right. In the high desert, where ancient spirits danced with desert winds and the stars told stories that spanned generations, the name of Lily Winters was spoken with the same reverence reserved for the greatest warriors. A white woman who had proven that honor knew no boundaries of race or culture. And in the sacred places where Navajo elders gathered to remember the old ways and teach them to the young, the story of the battle for Silver Canyon was woven into the oral tradition that would preserve it for generations yet to come. A testament to the truth that some fights are worth any sacrifice, and that the measure of a warrior is not in the enemies defeated, but in the innocents protected. 2 years later, the small schoolhouse stood like a beacon of hope on the edge of Gallup, its whitewashed walls gleaming in the New Mexico sunshine, while children's laughter echoed across the high desert where once only the wind had spoken to the empty spaces between earth and sky. Inside the single-room building, Bright Feather stood before a class of 23 students, both Navajo and white children learning side by side, her voice clear and confident as she read from a primer that contained stories in both English and Navajo, bridging two worlds that had seemed forever separated by fear and misunderstanding. At 19, she had become the first Native woman certified to teach in the territorial school system. Her education funded by an anonymous benefactor whose identity everyone in the territory suspected, but no one dared to confirm. Her classroom serving as proof that the sacrifices made at Silver Canyon had planted seeds that were finally beginning to bloom. Running Wolf worked as her assistant, his own education having resumed after months of healing from the physical and spiritual wounds inflicted during his captivity. His presence in the classroom serving as a living reminder to the children that even the darkest times could give way to hope and new beginnings. The boy, who had once hauled ore carts in the suffocating depths of Morrison's mine, now helped younger students with their arithmetic and geography, his patient manner and gentle smile showing no trace of the bitterness that might have consumed someone who had endured less and forgiven fewer. "Miss Brightfeather," called out a small white girl named Sarah Mackenzie, her blonde hair braided in a style that mimicked her Navajo classmates. "Will you tell us again about the warriors who saved the stolen children?" The request was not unusual. The story of Atsa Goldtooth and Lily Winters had become the most requested tale during the school's weekly storytelling sessions. Though Brightfeather was always careful to emphasize the lessons about courage and justice rather than the violent details that had made the rescue possible. "Every story teaches us something important," Brightfeather said, settling into the chair that had been crafted by Running Wolf from salvaged timber from the Silver Canyon mine, transforming something associated with suffering into a symbol of education and hope. "What do you think this story teaches us?" A Navajo boy named Little Bear raised his hand eagerly. "That it doesn't matter what color your skin is. Good people help good people, and bad people get what they deserve. And that children are worth fighting for," added Sarah, her young voice carrying a wisdom that would have impressed adults. Even when fighting is dangerous and scary, through the schoolhouse windows, the children could see riders approaching from the south. Two figures on horseback, moving with the easy confidence of people who belonged to the vast desert landscape. Their arrival causing a stir of excitement among students who had learned to recognize the sound of Thunderwalker's distinctive gait. Atsa Goldtooth dismounted outside the schoolhouse with the fluid grace that had made him legendary among both his own people and the white settlers who now spoke his name with respect rather than fear. His appearance subtly changed by 2 years of peace, but his eyes still carrying the alertness of a man who remained ready for whatever challenges might arise. Beside him, Lily Winters showed the effects of her transformation from Eastern Lady to Frontier Guardian, her skin bronzed by desert sun, and her manner bearing the quiet confidence of someone who had faced the worst humanity could offer and emerged victorious. Her reputation as a protector of the innocent having spread far beyond the boundaries of New Mexico territory. "Uncle Atsa, Miss Lily," Running Wolf called out, using the traditional term of respect for tribal elders, even though Atsa was only a few years older than himself. His joy at seeing his rescuers evident in his broad smile and the way he practically bounded across the schoolroom. The reunion was warm but brief, as both visitors were clearly traveling with a purpose that went beyond social calls. Their travel-stained clothes and the supplies tied to their saddles, suggesting they were either beginning or continuing a journey that would take them far from the relative safety of established settlements. "We can't stay long," Atsa explained to Brightfeather as she stepped onto the schoolhouse porch, her teacher's instincts immediately picking up on the tension that underlied their casual demeanor. "But we wanted to see how you and Running Wolf were settling into your new life. More importantly," Lily added, her voice carrying a note of urgency that suggested their visit was not entirely social. "We wanted to make sure you hadn't heard any reports of children going missing from this area. We've received word of possible trafficking activity resuming near the Colorado border." The question cast a shadow over what had been a joyful reunion, reminding everyone present that the victory at Silver Canyon had been only one battle in a war that would likely continue for years to come, as long as there were men willing to profit from the suffering of innocence. "Nothing here," Brightfeather assured them, though her expression showed that she understood the implications of their question. "But I've heard whispers from traders coming through town. Stories about mining operations north of Denver that seem to employ unusually young workers." "We've heard the same stories," Atsa confirmed grimly, his hand unconsciously checking the position of his rifle, "which is why we're heading north. There's apparently a man named Garrett who's taken over some of Morrison's old contacts and is trying to rebuild the trafficking network." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a territorial marshal, a middle-aged man named Peterson, who had earned a reputation for honesty and competence during the trials that had followed Morrison's death. His presence at the schoolhouse suggesting official business rather than a social visit. "Miss Winters, Mr. Goldtooth," Marshal Peterson said with the respectful tone that government officials had learned to use when addressing the two people who had accomplished more in 6 months than federal law enforcement had managed in 6 years. "I was hoping I'd catch you before you headed north." "Let me guess," Lily said with a slight smile. "The territorial governor wants us to work within official channels, follow proper procedures, and avoid creating international incidents by pursuing criminals across state lines." "Actually," Peterson replied, reaching into his coat pocket and producing a leather folder that bore official seals, "the governor wants to offer you both federal commissions as special investigators, with full authority to pursue trafficking cases wherever they might lead." The offer represented a complete reversal of the territorial government's previous position, acknowledging that conventional law enforcement had proven inadequate to address the complex criminal networks that operated across multiple jurisdictions and relied on corruption at the highest levels. "There would be conditions, of course," Peterson continued, "regular reports, coordination with local authorities where possible, and adherence to basic legal procedures. But essentially, you'd have a free hand to continue doing what you've been doing, just with official backing." Atza and Lily exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their shared experiences and mutual understanding, both recognizing the advantages that official authority would provide, while also understanding the constraints that might come with government oversight. "We'll consider it," Atza said diplomatically, "but right now, children are suffering while bureaucrats debate jurisdictional issues. Our priority has to be stopping Garrett's operation before it becomes as entrenched as Morrison's was." "I understand," Peterson replied, extending the folder toward Lily, "but take the paperwork with you. You might find that having official status makes certain aspects of your work considerably easier." As the marshal departed and Atza and Lily prepared to continue their journey north, Bright Feather approached with a small bundle wrapped in traditional cloth, her manner suggesting this was something she had been preparing for some time. "Food for the trail," she explained, though the careful way she handled the bundle suggested it contained more than simple provisions, and something else. Something that might help you remember what you're fighting for when the battles get difficult. Inside the cloth wrapping, along with jerky and hardtack that would sustain them during long days of riding, was a photograph that had been taken during the territorial celebration that had followed the Silver Canyon rescue, showing all 68 rescued children gathered together in front of the Santa Fe courthouse. Every face in that picture represents a family that was reunited, a future that was saved. "A child who will grow up free because of what you did," Bright Feather said softly. "When you face Garrett and his men, remember that these children are counting on you to protect other children who are suffering now." The photograph also included images of the 3 warriors who had died during the Silver Canyon assault, their faces forever young in the captured moment. A reminder that freedom often came at a price that was paid by the bravest and most selfless. "We'll bring them home," Lily promised, carefully tucking the photograph into her shirt pocket where it would remain close to her heart during the dangers that lay ahead. "All of them, just like we brought these children home." As they mounted their horses and prepared to ride toward whatever challenges awaited them in Colorado, the sound of children's voices drifted from the schoolhouse, reciting lessons that would prepare them for a future that looked considerably brighter than the past their older siblings had endured. "The story continues," Atza observed, gesturing toward the schoolhouse where Running Wolf was helping a young student with a geography lesson that included both the sacred mountains of the Navajo homeland and the cities of the eastern United States. "But now it's a story about building rather than just fighting. Building requires protecting, Lily replied, her eyes already focused on the northern horizon where dust clouds might indicate the presence of enemies or allies. And protecting requires people willing to face whatever darkness tries to destroy what we've built. They rode north together as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the desert, two unlikely partners bound by shared purpose and mutual respect. Their horses' hoofbeats marking a rhythm that had become as natural as breathing during their months of hunting monsters and protecting innocents. Behind them, the schoolhouse bell rang to signal the end of another day of learning, while children who might have grown up in chains instead ran laughing toward homes where they were loved and protected, their freedom a testament to the truth that some fights are worth any sacrifice. In the distance, Thunderwalker's distinctive whinny echoed off the red rocks and mesas, a sound that had become synonymous with hope for those who lived in fear and justice for those who preyed upon the innocent, carrying across the high desert like a promise that the hunt would continue until every child was safe. The desert wind carried their story toward the horizon, where other battles waited, but also carried the laughter of free children and the songs of healing families, proof that even in the harshest landscape, seeds of hope could take root and grow toward a future where courage mattered more than color, and justice was blind to everything except the protection of the innocent. And somewhere in the vast expanse of sky above the New Mexico territory, the spirits of ancient warriors smiled down on two modern guardians who had proven worthy of the trust placed in them by those who could no longer speak for themselves. Their legacy written not in stone, but in the hearts of children who would never have to fear the darkness that had once seemed so absolute. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.